Morning, everyone. This is update for September 13, 2022, day 202 of the war, end of the day update. I would like to start today with political discussion, and this specifically related to the war, and it's about peace negotiations, because it looks like peace negotiations started behind the scenes, and Russian side made sort of peace negotiation proposal to Ukrainian side about four days ago, plus minus. That proposal was rejected, and it does look to us that rocket strike against the Ukrainian energy infrastructure was response to the rejection by Ukrainian side of the Russian peace proposal. What we think, and this is obviously speculation, is that at this point proposal was Ukraine gets everything back what was up until February 24, and sort of more or less that's it. Ukrainian sort of position is Ukraine gets everything back what Ukraine had before February 2014, which means all of its territory, including Crimea. Plus, Russia will be paying reparations for all of this, and at the same time, sanctions to remain. Not clear for how long, but for some time. And then Ukraine gets guarantees from the West, meaning like Europe, US plus Australia. So that's Ukrainian position, and I guess it's more like Ukraine plus Ukrainian allies that help Ukraine to defend itself. So for that reason, Russian proposal was rejected. There was a negative response, sort of knee-jerk reaction from the Russian side, trying to force Ukrainian leadership back to the negotiations table. Then today was again a call from German Chancellor Scholz was conversation with Russian president, and the topic of that conversation apparently was again peace negotiation, and apparently he's trying to convince Russian president to agree to these terms that I just described, that Ukraine retains its territorial integrity in sort of whole, and Russia will have to pay reparations. And so that's where where it stands more or less as of right now. It's unclear what was responded by Russian president. At the same time, if we go and look back to the military situation, where everything stands, at this point, Ukrainian command is simply regrouping forces to deliver another blow to the Russian side. And at this point, Russian side is totally on defensive, lost initiative, and it's basically agony of the Russian forces in Ukraine. And specifically, we mean in Ukraine because on the Russian side, it's not war. Actually, in Ukrainian side, by the way, legally it's not a war. So there is no formal, by either side, there was no formal declaration of the war. So there was discussion internally within Russian top leadership about the mobilization, and apparently they are not comfortable. Whatever the reason, we can guess many different reasons, but at this point, Russian leadership is not comfortable to go with full mobilization. Anything can change at any moment, but as of sort of up to right now, let's put this way. And what happens here actually along the border, the kind of Russian troops here are actually conscripts. So that's what we're learning. And the reason Russian command is putting conscripts here, because technically if Ukraine sort of invades into Russian territory, that would be sort of formal declaration of the war, and then they can use conscripts, they can use propaganda machine within Russia. that this is defensive war now, and so on. Because within Russian society, there is more and more opposition, and people who were sort of quiet before because they Russian military was sort of winning, kind of, at least optically it was looking at, let's say, first couple like months. Now they have more argument where, okay, we failed here miserably, and it looks like it's, we're about to experience another failure. So these sort of voices that were quiet and they were opposing the war now becoming more loud, and this is what's going on inside of the Russian society. So apparently, that's one of the reasons why Russian leadership is not sort of willing to go into mobilization, because it's also probably hard to convince Russian society at large to go into sort of like aggressive war, just psychologically. So this is probably what's going on. At the same time, as we said, this is agony of the Russian troops, and it's just a question actually before they will be completely defeated. We even would say will be very bold sort of prediction, speculative, and we might be wrong. We would say that the war is basically over at this point, unless things change, unless there is some, decision within Russian leadership to use tactical nukes or, go and full in and destroy Ukrainian infrastructure and all of that. Unless that is, but that's totally unpredictable whether that decision will be made or not. But the way, based on the current situation, current configuration of the forces at this point, Russia lost this war in Ukraine, and it just question of time and obviously human lives before the Russian forces will be forced out of Ukraine. Because as we said yesterday, now the number of Russian forces is so, say, little, they simply cannot defend what they hold at this point. That's why initiative on Ukrainian command side, because then now they can pick and choose where they're going to be delivering fatal blows to the Russian military in Ukraine. So this is kind of like big picture what's going on. At the same time, we want to say that Ukrainian command is regrouping. We obviously don't know where sort of the next blow is going to happen. What is very clear that this Ukrainian group here will continue destroying Russian troops trapped on Kherson bridgehead, and we'll actually look there when we do the walkthrough, and we'll show there's quite a bit of progress being made. That was kind of like off radar, that most people didn't notice, but there was significant progress there. But the more important part, where the rest of all of these troops are going to be probably focused, is the next big objective is liberation of Donetsk. And that's a big city. It's agglomeration of many small towns. So it's not just Donetsk. It's just like the whole area is like urban area for really many kilometers, square kilometers. So you probably need like 500,000 soldiers to really, if you do frontal attack. So it definitely will not be frontal attack, and it will be some form of encirclement where Ukrainian side will create some kind of pincers from the north and then from the south to encircle Russian troops in Donetsk and then force their surrender there, basically. So that's why this bridgehead here is potentially could be very important, because this could be area from where Ukrainian command can launch attack, sort of move behind like sort of Severodonetsk, then start moving back south in the rear of this Russian troops here, with the idea going, as we discussed, going somewhere towards Russian border, and then potentially this is where the Russian command identified buildup of Ukrainian troops here near Vuhledar. This pincer is kind of like gonna go kind of here and then in direction of Mariupol essentially. So this is kind of like could be like the sort of last fatal blow to Russian troops here in Ukraine, which at that point it will be total disaster, and Russian troops will be forced to simply withdraw. They probably still withdraw to Crimea, and that would be sort of next item on the list. But at that point, probably at that point, there probably will be peace negotiations. So this is probably where it's all going, unless there is peace negotiation and acceptance by Russian side that Ukraine will have all of its territories back. If not, it just the way it is right now, it will happen. It's gonna be slower. It's gonna be more painful. More human lives will be lost in the process. So that's just kind of like a big picture right now. And again, this is assuming everything stays the way it is right now, because there is still a lot of kind of like we don't want to call it black swans, but like a lot of sort of unknowns that can be thrown into this fight by Russian side. In terms of like, let's say, conscripts, in terms of use of these tactical nuclear weapons, using simply attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, bridges, whatever, all of that still basically up on the table. On the other related sort of news, Russia actually finally got those drones from Iran and actually were used on the battlefield. It was an Ukrainian side shot down first drone. It was Shahid 136, and the Russian name of it is Gerain 2. So that just kind of update. It's not a game changer. It doesn't change anything in this war, but Russian sort of side started using those attack drones on the battlefield. So far, it wasn't very successful. And then one more update and clarification about this group list. It looks very impressive on sort of on this map, but it's basically all of these units. It's shadow itself. It's probably not more than like a little bit more than one brigade, 1.5 brigades here in total. Like if we consolidate it into some kind of like unit, sort of to fully understand, and even then. It's extremely low on equipment, on heavy equipment specifically. So it's totally, it's basically paper. Like it looks, I just want to draw this attention because it does look like it's a big list. And these units seem to look to be very impressive on paper, but what's left out of this is totally nothing essentially. And that's why this section of Frontline is still sort of soft for the Russian side. At the same time, we don't understand, we don't know why Ukrainian command is not trying to kind of continue pushing here, because this is the easiest place where Ukrainian command can continue pushing with with reaching its long-term objective of encircling Donetsk essentially. Because this is the softest right now for the Russian defense. It's in many ways similar situation to what German army experienced in the spring of 1943 when they successfully counterattacked Soviet army near Belgorod here, and they could have encircled Soviet troops in this Kursk salient if they did not wait and attacked immediately. But the decision was made by German, by actually I think by Hitler, to wait for more troops to come, to more equipment and advanced equipment and so on, and that wait made it impossible for German troops to succeed in eliminating this Kursk salient. But the point was not eliminating, but actually in encircling Soviet troops in there. So it's similar could be lost opportunity for Ukrainian command if they wait and don't attack in this area where it's still soft right now, but it's basically it's becoming more and more cement, like it's turning into more like a concrete situation with every passing day here. Now let's actually switch to the walks through the front line and see actually what's going on the front lines. So situation remains sort of active along the state border. There is active exchange of all sorts of fire, all of the adversarial actions. So this is not sort of just want to draw attention that this is not sort of peaceful and quiet section of the border. It just there is no sort of infantry attacks, but otherwise there is all sort of actions there. Now let's move to this North Lugansk, let's call it, section of the front line, and let's see what's going on there. So this is kind of like a high level. So Ukrainian defense forces are on the western side of Oskil River. At the same, and then let's actually look what's going on here. Ukrainian troops are trying to continuing building this bridgehead. At the same time, there is no strong attacks directly at Lyman and Yampin at this point. So again, this is what, in a way, we feel confused in terms of what's the future plans and why there is such a lack of concentrated effort here, because this is where potential opportunity is for Ukrainian side. So basically, what Ukrainian troops did, they expanded and they liberated this village Shurove, but it really doesn't sort of change the big picture, because the key here is Lyman, because it kind of unlocks the gates to sort of flood inside of this area where it's more, at this point, it's not foresty anymore, but sort of more open fields where the troops can move and can kind of make big strides in the Russian defenses here. Now let's move. This is just kind of, again, big picture view of all this North Lugansk section of the front line. No changes there, and no sort of any kind of movement actually on Ukrainian side. Let's put it this way. Now let's move to North Donbass section of the front line. So this we confirm that Ukrainian troops basically liberated this Novogrygorivka and established bridgehead on the other side of the river. Sort of kind of, in a way, strange way to sort of continue the attack, because it's kind of like deep in the forest. Then there is a pressure towards this refinery here, which essentially destroyed. At the same time, Russian Wagner mercenaries continuing pressure here in Soledar and Bahmut. And that's actually, they made some progress. Let's just look in a southern section of it. They captured village Mykhaylivka 2 here. This is on this road from Bahmut to, I don't know where, Gorlivka, I think. So they captured that village. They putting pressure on village Adradivka here. Even this is a success, right, by Russian troops. There is no question about it. We would be concerned, in the past, before this whole large 2 offensive started. Right now, this push west here is essentially like putting a rope on your neck and then tightening it up for future, to get hanged. This is what this push right now at this point. It's totally moot point, and it actually makes future situation of Russian defensive forces even worse, because they're pulling themselves even in a deeper future pocket. Because as we discussed, if Ukrainian command attacks, it will be Ukrainian troops will move somewhere sort of deep, much further east of all of these troops here, somewhere around Alchevsk, and definitely bypassing Alchevsk here. So that's just going to have more territory that Russian troops will need to cover in attempt to break out from that future pocket, if that's what happens. But that's really the only option that's available for Ukrainian command. There's not much they can. There's not many other sort of option they have in terms of liberating Donetsk. It simply needs to be encircled one way or another. And we don't think that they're going to attack here in the North Donbass simply because, there is relatively strong Russian units, which is Wagner mercenaries, and it's going to be higher, more costly, more difficult to break through this area. I mean, but anything is possible. Let's put it this way. And then as a whole, we're also observing significant breakdown in a Russian fighting spirit in a soldier in units. The exception only the airborne units, naval infantry units, and Wagner mercenaries. That's where still, as we said, that's a backbone that still sort of fights, still performs. But in other units, there is a significant breakdown of the will to fighting will. Now let's see what's going on west of Donetsk. So here, Ukrainian troops launch small counterattacks, and Russian troops also attack. So this is kind of like a meeting engagement here going on, but nothing really big on big scale. It's more just a local, really tactical local fights here, essentially at this point. This is nothing major from Ukrainian side, and obviously Russian side. This is also, they don't have resources to do anything major either at this point. This is just a map to show that there was no progress from August 21st here, essentially on this around Piskier area. Now let's look at Zaporizhy front line. Let's see what's going on there. Again, this is quiet for now, but Russian resources continue saying that Ukrainian command is building up troops here in this corner around Vuhledar. That's, as we discussed, let's just look at the big picture here. This is around this area. So this really could be opportunity to sort of jump to the, run to the sea, probably somewhere east of Mariupol, and another sort of group can move in the eastern and the northern direction to meet with their northern pincer. But that's the only sort of options left here for Ukrainian command. Now let's move to Kherson bridgehead and let's see what's going on there. As I mentioned before, there was significant progress by Ukrainian troops here. Russian side is withdrawing orderly, but in pretty quick fashion, and the amount of the losses on Ukrainian side has reduced significantly. There are still losses, no question about, but it went down because before, in initial phase, this attack offensive on Kherson bridgehead was relatively costly. It was normal for the offensive, but it still was sort of costly. Now it kind of like went into the phase where the number of losses went down. There are still losses, but which means that essentially, that's why we said that the Russian will to continue fight is broken essentially, and not broken, and also there is lack of resources to fight with, specifically ammunition and all of that, because Ukrainian forces continue attacking on this pontoon bridges and ferries across Dnipro River, so the supply is totally constrained, and the Russian troops rely on heavy use of artillery, and Russian artillery in turn uses a lot of ammunition. So, and that really means like railroad amount. You really need like railroad to supply enough ammunition for the use that they had. And so once that turned off, the ability to mount to have defensive action is very limited. They basically slowly but surely losing ground, and that probably will continue. We don't know what's going on here, if Ukrainian troops manage, first of all, if Russian troops are still here, or this is at this point also controlled by Ukrainian troops. So this is kind of like unknown question to us. What is really known that where the sort of tip of the iceberg, tip of Ukrainian spear is here, and I just want to show it a little bit more clear on this more detailed map. So this is where we ended up, sort of the first phase of Ukrainian offensive. Ukrainian troops liberated Arkhangelsk, Olginovo, Sokopilya. Then they were here in Dobryanka, Trudolubivka, and then Khrushchevka. This was kind of like the front, where Frontline was. Then it was kind of like off the radar screen. And then what happened is that Ukrainian troops first, they managed to breach Russian defensive lines and liberate these three villages. And apparently after that, the offensive went sort of more smoothly. And so at this point, the tip of the iceberg is this village Novogrygorivka, where Russian troops tried to counterattack Ukrainian troops, but they were not successful. And for the obvious reasons, because at this point they are in, call it, significant minority. They're not like, let's say, okay, fewer in number, but they significantly outnumbered by Ukrainian troops, and they don't have support of artillery and air support, so they just losing very, very quickly. So this is where I said it's unclear if Russian troops still controlling this area, or they decided to sort of straighten the front line, and their stronghold is just this village Duchany here. This is kind of like a big question mark where it is here. Also, some reports say that Ukrainian troops are as close as this Velika Alexandrivka. So essentially what this means that Ukrainian troops controlling Novodmitrivka and they attacking Velika Alexandrivka. Don't have confirmation or enough confirmation for this. So this for now, this presented this way. Also, Ukrainian troops apparently tried to attack here, trying to kind of like create mini encirclement around the Vidiv Bridge today, but Russian sources say that attempt was repelled. But it's just a question of time before it will be successful. So as a whole, if we go back to this whole bridgehead, what is sort of writing on the wall is that Russian command needs to withdraw all of these units out of this bridgehead as soon as possible. And as the bridgehead shrinks, opportunity to withdraw all of these troops will become smaller and smaller. It will not be as successful as with the Zoom bridgehead, where Russian troops just abandoned for the most part equipment. They just loaded on the trucks and quickly left. So that was actually learning from that offensive that the troops becoming very mobile, and it's really hard to encircle because you have trucks, you have they're much more motorized than, let's say, even comparing to World War II. So they super mobile, and you really need to be much faster. Here, there is a problem with that. There is a Dnipro River, and ferries are being constantly attacked and destroyed, and pontoon bridge is the same. So here, the mobility is sort of not there. So for that reason, that's why we're saying, if as this bridgehead shrinks more and more, opportunity to withdraw these troops will be less and less, essentially. And it's at that point they might be actually. There might be a real pocket where you will see a lot of Russian prisoners of war. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.